Jane, thank you for being my fresh face in hell this week.
Thanks so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be in hell.
I read your book and I'm fascinated by the premise. So, I don't want to oversimplify here, but basically America was founded by a cult and cult behavior has become sort of a integral part of our national psyche. This is a compelling premise. But first, let's define cult and let's clarify the difference between cult and commune because there's a lot of crossover in these two
Yeah,
things.
yeah. They both claim to try to make the world a better place. Cold is a slippery word, definitely, and it gets overused to the degree that it can become meaningless. Helpfully, a psychologist named Robert J. Lifton developed a definition in the 90s, which has become canon among the anti-cult community. And there's basically three characteristics. So if you're looking at a cult, that means there's some kind of leader who's being worshipped. The worship part is important. This is the, traditional charismatic leader figure. There is undue influence at play, thought control, mind reform, what we used to call brainwashing. And then there's actual harm done. Typically, that's to people within the group. Typically, that's financial exploitation, sometimes also, of course, sexual exploitation. So a lot of groups are culty, cultish, but they don't meet all of those characteristics. And so we wouldn't technically define them as a cult or destructive cult, sometimes is the phrase used. Communes are interesting for so many reasons, but in this parallel, because they are often isolated groups, which is, of course, common among cults. Not all cults are isolated groups, but most of them are. I think what's usually the distinction between a cult and a commune is that communes are missing that charismatic leader. Communes are missing that narcissist at the top who just wants to take advantage of everyone.
It's interesting because I wonder if one doesn't usually emerge in those situations. Like if there's a commune and there's some sort of dearth of leadership, it seems like one would sort of naturally emerge out of it in this sort of like Lord of the Flies sort of way. But it sounds like you've got to have. It sounds like the cult leader has a MO right from the beginning. Regarding our present moment politically in America, when you were asked in an interview, how did we get here? Your reply was, "We've been here all along," which is great. I knew the Pilgrims were weird. But I knew they were a puritanical bunch. But how are the Puritans and the Pilgrims cultish? Unpack this for me. I don't think we all learn about the Pinto and the Santa Maria and stuff like that in like second grade or whatever. But listen, this is all kind of new to me. I mean, I don't really remember much about the Puritans but this is central to your logic.
Yeah, so technically I refer to the Pilgrims and Puritans as high control doomsday groups because they were exceptionally culty, but they did not have that charismatic leader that we reference. You could argue that Jesus was their charismatic leader, but of course he'd been gone for 1,600 years at that point. So, but they meet the other characteristics. And often when you're looking at a high control group, you're also looking at a cult. The Puritans and Pilgrims were doomsday groups. They believed that the end was coming any minute now. And in fact, that's why they fled England. The Puritans fled England. The Pilgrims came from Holland. And maybe I should also quickly distinguish them. The Pilgrims came on the Mayflower in 1620, and they were not all religious extremists. There were also, some indentured servants on the boats and some people just looking for, a new economic opportunity. But most of them were radical Protestants. They were called hot Protestants back in Europe.
And these are the Pilgrims.
These are the Pilgrims.
And they came from England, or they came from.
So they had already left England. They had been living in Holland for a few years, because Holland was offering religious freedom at the time. The Pilgrims were separatists. They wanted absolutely nothing to do with the Church of England because they thought it had not done enough to distance itself from Catholicism. The radical Protestants, the hot Protestants, believed that the Pope was the Antichrist. Catholicism was evil and in cahoots with the devil. And so the Pilgrims were considered separatists, and that was treason, right? Because church and state were one and the same in England. So they fled to Holland. But They weren't happy in Holland for a few reasons, one of them being that they didn't want their kids growing up in this liberal society. They wanted theocracy. They wanted to be in charge of everything. So they came to America in 1620. Now, they were headed actually for the Staten Island, essentially, the mouth of the Hudson River. They got way off course. They made a lot of mistakes. Half of them died within a year of being in Plymouth. They had a rough start. The Puritans started coming over a decade later in 1630 on the Arabella and then a succession of other ships. And the Puritans were not separatists. They just wanted to, quote unquote, purify the Church of England, remove any remnant of Catholicism. So they had a charter. They had investors. The Pilgrims had investors too, which is something we don't typically think about of these groups. We think of them as being wanting to be separate from commerce, that's what communes do. But that's not what the Pilgrims and the Puritans were doing. At any rate, they were doomsday groups. They believed the end was coming any day now. Up in Massachusetts, there were several predictions of when doomsday would occur. They were a high control group. They, belief, information intake, behavior, all of these things were controlled via high compressor to conform. It was illegal to argue with the minister. It was illegal to skip church. People were turned into informants on one another. This was a culture of punishment, extreme punishment, designed to humiliate, again, typical of high control groups and cults.
And how many people are we talking about here? Just so, because this is a history lesson for me. When we're talking about, are we 300 people? Or?
So the Pilgrims were a very small community. They were somewhere, I'm not going to remember the numbers exactly, but we're talking like 50 people there. The Puritans were, people just kept coming. So they were growing constantly. Now, within a year, 100 people had gone back to England because they were like, this is a nightmare and the church magistrates are drunk on power and we don't want anything to do with it. And then, of course, the church magistrates were like, they just couldn't handle the hard work. They just couldn't hack it, And honestly, I think both arguments had a little merit to them. It was incredibly hard work to be living in one of these colonies. And they were also incredibly successful. The Puritans were one of the most successful colonies in world history. And their culture spread through the nation, which, of course, is foundational to my argument that their doomsday ideas didn't go away. They became the foundation of secular American culture.
So both groups subscribe to a doomsday doctrine.
Yes.
And in both cases, this goes, I'm assuming, to Revelations.
Oh, they loved Revelation. Yes, very much. In fact, there was a poem published in the second half of the 1600s called The Day of Doom by this guy, Michael Wigglesworth, a pastor. And it was about what's going to happen. It imagined what will happen when Jesus returns and swipes everyone left or right. And this poem was so popular, it's been called America's first bestseller. They just ate it up. Doomsday was commonly preached from the pulpit. It was a scare tactic, right? It was used to keep people in line. And this part of what was so fascinating to them about Revelation and about the Day of Doom was the punishment, was how people were going to get it and wail and beg for mercy and then be thrown into the fire. I mean, why else, if that wasn't so interesting to them, why else would the people who were being saved be taken up to heaven first to help? That's what they thought, is that if you were chosen, then you would go help Jesus damn everyone else, including possibly your spouse or your child. And this was considered, a gift.
Now, you talk about this stuff, and I so many light bulbs are going off about just MAGA. And a lot of this is these people sound aggrieved. Anybody who wants to punish somebody else or not have, want the other people to have the opportunities they've haven't enjoyed or whatever, we land on grievance. And how does grievance play into all of this? Clearly, MAGAs are all aggrieved. They're like, oh, there's the lefty elites took away all our jobs, but this too goes all the way back to the Puritans.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, if you believe in any kind of doomsday narrative is going to inherently have in it a grievance narrative, because if you believe you're chosen, then there has to be a group of people who are not chosen, right? There have to be others, or chosen among whom, right? It's part of the definition. And so typically, if you're going to be saved on doomsday, well, saved from what? There's some kind of persecution, there's some bully. And so what's supposedly going to happen on doomsday is that the bully will be punished and you will be rescued into perfection, end of the world. There you go. So it's very easy to pull people into this kind of narrative, which is used by narcissists typically as a way to get power and influence, is to pull people toward you by saying to them, you were promised something and you don't have it because it was taken from you. It was robbed. You were robbed by insert straw man, right? And if you give me power, if you follow me, then I will return to you what is rightfully yours by punishing said straw man. And we see that pattern again and again.
We're seeing we're seeing some of, like, to bring it to Trump, that we're seeing that the cult participation increases during times of crisis. First we should talk about this, but, like, people are leaving it now in the face of a different crisis. But first, let's talk about how cult participation increases during times of crisis.
So, sociologists point out that anyone can join a cult. It happens to anyone because it's not the psychological profile; it's the context. So people join cults when they are unmoored, so to speak. So they've lost a loved one, or they've been divorced. They've just lost a job. They've moved to a new town. They don't know anyone. This is why cults recruit on college campuses, right? Kids show up. They don't know anyone. They're looking for community. What
It's always the lost, bereft souls from MAGA to Spawn Ranch. It's always these compromised.
Mhm, mhm. Well, and
Yeah.
often they're unmoored because of some kind of crisis. And so when we're talking about cult-like thinking at the societal level, when is a society unmoored? During times of social upheaval, technological revolution, and crisis. And all three of those things are happening right now. AI, of course, is changing. We're all going to lose our jobs. Um, Social media has shattered the way we communicate with one another. And then, of course, social upheaval. We're going to be majority minority in another 15 years. That's fueling the replacement theory and a lot of anxieties around that. And crisis, I would say we're facing the biggest crisis perhaps our country has ever faced, which is that 90% of Americans are chronically under-resourced. The economic crisis at the time is making people desperate. People have taken on extra jobs. They don't have savings anymore. They're taking on debt. Now, SNAP is being taken away. When people are in crisis, they will turn to a strong man making promises.
Yeah, this is a monomyth in America that we want a strong man to save us. I mean, we're obsessed with superheroes and cowboys,
Uh-huh,
right?
uh-huh.
But what happens when their strong man? Where are we now? Because their strong man has proven himself to be a diaper filling, falling asleep in the Oval Office, like complete boob, like. Wah.
Well, it'll be curious to see. I mean, I think we're experiencing a failure of prophecy at the moment. And typically following a failure of prophecy, which, could in the micro example of that would be like, oh, the world is going to end on Sunday, and then it doesn't. What happens? And then at the macro level is what we're experiencing now. Trump made all these promises, and they're not coming true. So typically following a failure of prophecy, about 30% of people will leave. They'll see the difference between what was promised and the reality of waking up and seeing the world still there. And they'll see those things as distinct, and they'll choose reality and they'll leave. Everyone who stays tends to dig their heels in deeper. They hold those two different realities in their mind as a kind of cognitive dissonance. And this is actually where the phrase cognitive dissonance came from, was cult studies. They'll hold those two things and they'll find a way to make it work. So the leader will say, oh, actually, instead of a literal apocalypse, it was a spiritual apocalypse. And the followers go, oh, okay, yeah, that makes sense. Or the leader will say, actually, we prayed so hard that God decided not to end the world. And that makes sense to people, and they'll stay, and they become more loyal. And so for Trump's base, I don't think they're going anywhere for a while. I think they're going to remain loyal, and perhaps their loyalty will increase. But yes, we are seeing a lot of other people leave. I mean, just forget which sporting event he got booed.
Yeah, it was the Washington Commanders.
Yeah,
Uh,
that was
he
wild.
shows up. Well, he wants to name their new stadium after him, and
Oh.
I'm like, "Well, sorry, dude. The Orange Bowl's already taken. First of all, that's in Miami. The Meadowlands is in New Jersey, but hey, Pedolands is
Oh
available."
boy.
Yeah, no, you say his base is not going anywhere, but I do feel like the base is shrinking, right? I mean,
I think so.
yeah, I mean, I can't believe when I see the approval ratings that they're still in the 30s. I don't. I have a hard time trusting that. That makes it sound like his base is still in the 30s, and I thought that's where his base has
Mhm,
always
mhm,
been,
mhm.
is about 30%. And then there was like, and 15-20% of like, fiscal Republicans or just, liberal haters kind of glommed on. But now it seems like his approval rating should be about 15%. Like if I'm reading the pulse of the country, but like the media keeps telling me we're still in the mid 30s.
When people leave cults, and whether or not MAGA is a cult is up for debate, and we could unpack that a little bit if you want. But when,
I
yeah,
would because yeah, it's definitely a cult. I mean, with the
people leave cults when they become unplugged from the source of indoctrination, and the source of indoctrination, of course, is almost always the leader. So this is why kids got kidnapped out of cults by, parents in the 80s hired deprogrammers to kidnap their kids out of cults, because if they could just get the kid into like a house and bar the windows and lock the doors, after 72 hours, the kid would wake up. And that's often what happens. It didn't always work, and deprogrammers don't try not to kidnap
It's
kids
kinda
anymore,
like
but a
detoxing.
little
Yeah,
bit.
no, I had friends detox from heroin, and you
Yeah.
had to lock them in the room, and they're like, "Look, no matter if I tell you I'm dying, don't open the door."
Oh,
I mean, you'd put
yeah.
furniture in front of the door, everything. So, but and they had success with that, literally just
Yeah.
like they're clear after 3 days?
Yeah.
Like,
Well,
"Oh,
and then it would be years, of course, of really getting it out of your system. I mean, the deprogramming process, is in some ways never ending. And, I've interviewed several former cult followers who talk about how long of a process it is. And, very much like addiction. I mean, it's an interesting analogy that you bring up. But so my point is that as long as Trump is around, he's going to have a certain amount of followers. Um, I think whenever he leaves this earthly plane by natural causes, I hope, um, that's when I
I
think
don't care at this
poof.
point." I
I
just
think it goes
yeah.
poof a little bit. Yeah,
Really?
I do.
Well, I mean, those people don't have anything to hang their hat on. They don't have anywhere to hang their grievances. They're just gonna have to, face the reality that they have no strong man to save them. Unless it's Barack Obama comes back. Man, I'll tell you. Well, so what is the argument that it's not a cult? I mean, I can't think of a cogent argument that explains why a large sector of people would continue to to believe what are time and again proven as lies over and over again. Like
Yeah.
when even Fox News and the Wall Street Journal, even the sort of like, gatekeepers of conservatism have turned on this guy. You almost to have this cultish propensity to hang on, don't you?
So there's cults, actual isolated groups, and then there's cult-like thinking at the societal level. And there have been movements in the past that have been designated as cult-like by scholars, by sociologists. For example, Nazism and Marxism are both considered cult-like movements. Um, I personally believe MAGA is a cult-like movement. Is it an actual quote unquote cult? I don't know. That's harder to say. I've heard some very compelling arguments that QAnon was a cult specifically because it had Trump as a charismatic leader. And I do believe Trump is a charismatic leader. And I do believe undue influence and thought reform are at play. I mean, getting people to vote against their interests would be one example of that. Getting people to believe the lies, of course, and the misinformation that's being spread. And I do believe actual harm is being done because the people who are suffering are not being aided in their suffering. And then, of course, again, with the government shutdown and SNAP benefits being taken away, I mean, that's actual harm is being done to millions of Americans. So, yeah, that meets the definition for me. And, not every cult-like movement is far right. Um, Extremist, you could say every cult-like movement is extremist, but there have been far-left cult-like movements, and there have been far-left cults. Jonestown was a far-left cult. Sullivanians would be another. So this kind of thinking is not unique to the far right, but it currently has a stronghold within the far right in 2025 America. Absolutely.
So rebellion's been a defining principle of the separatist movements since the Reformation. Um, but like when MAGA stormed the White House, like what in their minds are they rebelling against?
The people they've been told had robbed them of the promises that were owed to them. It was a grievance narrative. I mean, specifically they were coming after Nancy Pelosi. Specifically, they were coming after Mike Pence, the people who were going to swear in Joe Biden, because they believed that these people were robbing them of the opportunity to have Trump, who was going to make their lives better again, rescue them from their economic crisis, rescue them from their health crises resulting from our healthcare system being in shambles. Um, Also, a lot of them literally believed the lie about the pedophile ring in the pizza basement. That stuff had purchase as well. And I think a lot of people who stormed the White House just wanted to. I mean, there were a lot of opportunists in militia movement members, anti-government movement members, saw this as an opportunity to conflate that mission with their own and just generally disrupt and burn it all down.
What a quagmire. I mean, talk about cognitive dissonance. These conspiracy theorists with the pedophile ring, and I mean, look, I mean, they're willing to take the leap that Hillary Clinton is drinking brain fluid out of a living child or something in the basement of a ping pong bar. Which, by the way, I've done an event at Comet Ping Pong. There is no basement, I know, but they're willing to be, and yet they're faced with the overwhelming amount of evidence that this guy is like backstage at beauty shows, ogling, preteen girls and like holding his daughter on his lap. That's if they're really that concerned with pedophilia,
Yeah,
like help me out here. Like how
yeah,
the cognitive dissonance runs deep. So there must be something below that. Again, it just still comes down to the grievance, I
uh-huh.
guess, and said they're just going to throw anything into the wall. We'll use pedophilia now, but like you know, people are saying that this will be that the Epstein files will break his back. But I don't know. I'm just sitting here going like, well, we all know it. So what I think the big revelation here is how many people on both sides of this are probably going to be
Yeah.
involved.
Oh, yeah.
You
Oh, absolutely.
Which is the only way I can explain any sort of Democratic complicity in this.
Mhm.
Clearly, somebody's
Mhm.
protecting their own
Mhm.
asses as
Yep.
well. All right, I don't want to sidetrack the whole conversation with that, but I am fascinated with this. Is that I'm fascinated with our obsession with America, and I guess we worship the wealthy, and we always have. I
Uh-huh.
mean, back to it's always been the ultimate goal. Sometimes we even conflate, we conflate wealth with moral character,
Mhm.
and how has that worked out for us?
Yeah, not great, because that's what allowed us all to be, have all the money taken from us by the 1%. So the Puritans were very clear on the boat ride over on the Arabella that You were to give to your neighbor, even if you knew that that debt could not be repaid. So we didn't start out that way. However, the Puritans also believed that the best way to glorify God was through work, to have a calling. And the more you worked, the more money you made. So couldn't it be true that the money you acquired was just evidence of how much you loved God and of how much God loved you in return? And this caught fire. And Cotton Mather, a minister toward the end of the Puritan experiment, was quoted saying that in 1690 that religion begot prosperity and the daughter devoured the mother. So it was already happening in the 1600s. And we still continue to, as you say, equate the number in a person's bank account with their moral character. That is very American. We worship the wealthy. During the Gilded Age, John D. Rockefeller was fond of saying that he got his money from God. So if it's true that God shows his love through wealth, then wouldn't it also be true that the poor are God's forsaken, the unchosen, right? They're sinners. God assessed them and deemed them unworthy, and so their poverty is an example of their sin and also, therefore, their punishment. And
yet that's just totally, completely, and totally the Bible says the opposite.
Yeah,
It
exactly.
says the meek shall inherit
Yeah.
the earth.
But
Again, it just all comes to me, like, at the bottom of all of this, people's is anti-intellectualism.
well, yeah.
I'm sorry, I don't I don't wanna be unfair and miscasting people that join cults, but just maybe you're just so traumatized you can't think straight, but otherwise you can't really be a good critical thinker. And we have an anti-intellectual streak in America that goes back, like, all the way to the beginning. De Tocqueville recognized this immediately upon visiting America, 300 years ago. What do we owe this tendency, do you think? Is it just strict adherence to biblical text, or what? Like, why do we have this anti-intellectual streak?
I mean, I think it came from the Puritans. The Puritans were anti-elitist and anti-intellectual, and they didn't invent the idea. It was popular in the Renaissance, the idea of the tendency to lionize the fool, right? The idea being that the simple-minded, at least, weren't deceiving us, and therefore they had some kind of virtue for that reason. But the Puritans really took it and ran with it. Um, they valued simplicity of manner and dress, and also thought and speech. And some scholars have argued that this was a defense mechanism, that they thought, well, if England and Europe are calling us, silly or stupid or making fun of the way we dress, then at least we can consider that a virtue. At least, we can say, well, that's what God wants, and you're evil sinners. And so anti-intellectualism, anti-elitism has been at the heart of the Americas from the jump. Once some of the coastal cities, the merchants got some power and control away from the theocracy, and we started to see cities that were kind of like the big cities in Europe, where people wanted nice clothes and nice restaurants. And so then we see thinkers in America, Benjamin Franklin among them, eventually Ralph Waldo Emerson, deriding these cultural cities on the coast as evil, as being Europe come here. And this is part of what fueled Manifest Destiny is, oh, we have to keep heading west to find pure territory that we can develop the right way without it being corrupted by European manners and elitism. And then, of course, it just kept getting corrupted, and so they just kept fleeing further and further west.
Well, another one of the most powerful draws to cultism, and here I'm not thinking about MAGA more here, but a little bit, because I mean the guy's a snake oil salesman. But I'm thinking more about like Scientology and the like. One of the big incentives seems to be like self improvement. Let's explore the American obsession with self-improvement. Self-help and wellness trends are ubiquitous on the internet. Can you talk a bit about success cults?
Gosh, the success cult. I mean, the success cult specifically references a movement around following the Civil War, basically up through the trust busting of the early 1900s, wherein suddenly anyone could strike it rich, supposedly, right? We saw figures like Andrew Carnegie and the Rockefellers suddenly get rich. And so this idea was that it can happen to anyone. Now, of course, that wasn't true. As soon as the window opened, it started to close because people who had grabbed the power wanted to keep it from anyone else. But they kept this myth going, this myth of the self-made man, because some people started making a lot of money off it by selling, again, pamphlets. So this was the birth of the self-help industry, was people selling pamphlets to desperate upstarts saying, you too can be rich. All you need is a good moral character. There was no actual business advice in these books. And there was a flood of them. I mean, people at the time have been quoted saying, like, how can anyone read these books? They're all saying the same thing. They're just repurposing information. They're full of filler in their rush to market. Um, and so the myth of the self-made man, of course, is still with us, the whole bootstrapping thing. It's
Exactly, yeah.
never been real. It's always
But it's highly exploitable.
that's why it exists, because people who do have power get to hold on to it by distracting the people they're exploiting, by promising them, "You too can." I mean, this is what's behind multi-level marketing, right? This is the false promise, at this point, false promise of the American dream. You too can, and therefore, don't come at me because of all that I have. You can have it too. In reality, we should be coming at them because the reason they have all they have is they've systematically taken it by plundering America's general coffers and by suppressing wages.
Yeah, I read, I think it was in your book that, like, nearly 20% of American households are still participating in pyramid
Yeah,
schemes, which blows
I
me
know. It's
away.
incredible.
And you point out that this is an ethos. This also goes back to the Puritans.
Right. Well, I mean, multi-level marketing companies typically promise some kind of it's not a strict doomsday narrative, but there's a lot of parallels. Amway in particular, I mean, the guys, the diamonds, the leaders at the top of these chains were worshipped. I mean, the fervor that they would receive when they took the stage at events, seminars, and they had recorded their motivational speeches onto these tapes that recruits and distributors would then listen to in the car, driving from meeting to meeting to meeting, just constantly working for nothing. And so when they did their taxes and were like, "Oh, I'm actually losing money in this program," instead of leaving or whistleblowing, they would say, and be told when they asked for advice, "Oh, you just need to listen to more tapes. You just need more motivation. You're not working hard enough. The problem is you." And then when you ingest that kind of shame, um, not only do you continue working because you think, I have to fix the problem is me. But again, you silence any impulse to whistleblow. You silence any impulse to talk to someone else in the organization and be like, hey, did you look at your taxes? Because you're so ashamed. And when people do finally break and leave these organizations because of that shame, they do it quietly and without causing a fuss or talking to anyone about it.
Shame. That is sort of where indoctrination begins, right?
Mm,
I mean, that's what cults predictably do. I mean, even look at the military, right? I mean, the first thing they do to a new recruit is just break them down.
mhm,
Shame them, break them down to a dirty dog, and, like, just start reprogramming them as a fighting machine or
mhm,
whatever. So, shame is like, you're talking about these people they're exploiting some of the most damaged and vulnerable people out there. And this seems to be this idea of breaking them down and reprogramming. This is we've got a few minutes here. Can we talk about some other cults? Like one of the cults you talk about in the book is Elizabeth Clare and the Church of the Universal and Triumphant.
Yes.
Um, this is another doomsday cult. Let's start there.
Elizabeth Clare Prophet is a fascinating figure in cult history. First of all, it's not super common to have a female cult leader. Often when that happens, it's because they took control after the male leader died, and that's what happened in Church Universal and Triumphant. Her husband started the group in 1958. It was called the Summit Lighthouse at the time. He died in 73, and she took over and was much better than he was at being a cult leader. Took the group worldwide, changed the name, and I think I can't remember how many followers they had over the time, but they garnered a lot of attention in the late 80s because they had been building underground bunkers in Montana. They spent $25 million on materials alone to build these bunkers, which were supposed to hold 750 some people for 7 years. That was the
And this money came from the acolytes?
Yep.
I mean, this money, they basically mined but there had to be more than 750 of them, so
way more.
somebody's getting
No, way more.
screwed.
Because there were people all over the nation and the world, but mostly in America, and they weren't all planning to come live in the bunkers. But if you wanted a cot in the bunker, then you had to pay a lot of money, 30,000 or something. I can't remember exactly how much. And so at the same time around then, they accidentally dumped 32,000 gallons of diesel into the Montana wilderness, like right by Yellowstone. And also right around then, a couple of their members got caught buying weapons under a fake name, which revealed this plan to collect all these military grade weapons, like an arsenal that they were going to have with them in the
And this is
bunker.
what year?
This was in the late
Refresh me.
80s.
Okay.
And so then they started winding up in the media. Ted Koppel interviewed Elizabeth Clare Prophet and was incredibly dismissive, which I find frustrating because I think the media diminishes and ignores these groups at our own peril. But his whole take was like, this is silly. This doesn't warrant coverage. Why are we even talking about? I think at the end of the interview, he was like, well, I don't know what we learned, but at least it was interesting. And it's like, come on, they're amassing an arsenal. Like, please pay attention.
Well, yeah, I mean, and pretty soon we're looking at Ruby Ridge and Waco are still down the pipe, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it was actually the kind of a prescient conversation potentially. So with this Church of the Universal and Triumphant, what was the actual ideology here?
So they believed in ascended masters, and she was supposedly, when she would speak in front of the crowd, she was supposedly receiving a dictation from an ascended master, guys like Saint Germain, El Moria. And so this belief system was heavily influenced by some pre-existing movements. The I Am movement, also some of New Thought in general. There were some other influences, but
Remember that lady?
well,
The lady that was
channeling.
channeling.
Yeah. So apparently she was channeling. I mean, presumably, I think she was just speaking extemporaneously, which again makes her even the more fascinating. This gift that she had, but so she believed that the ascended masters were holding back punishment, God's punishment, because of karma that we had been accruing for sins. And so her goal was to diminish karma to the degree that everyone could escape the cycle of reincarnation. But as the group went on and she became more paranoid, and again, these groups always follow the same path, right? It became less and less about saving the world and more about the inevitability of doomsday coming, and let's just save ourselves. Because God has chosen us to lead the world following its destruction in, again, theocracy, right? Some kind of, not Christian nationalism, although they were kind of Christian, but theocracy. And so she started making these predictions of the end of the world. This was around 89, 90. So she kept the specifics mostly to herself. She was smart. She was incredibly intelligent, as are her children, and I interviewed a couple of them for the book. Um, and she knew that if she named a particular day and it didn't happen, right, that would be bad. But she started saying, "Oh, on such and such a date, there's going to be a drill. We're going to run a drill. So everyone be here and we'll go in our bunkers," right? And then doomsday didn't happen. And so she would predict another day. So the people close to her knew that she was making these predictions, but no one else did. So in March of 1990 is when she changed. Something in her changed. And it was no longer about praying for El Moria and Saint Germain and whomever else to stop the bombs, because she thought what was going to kick off the apocalypse was going to be a nuclear attack from Russia. And she also thought, by the way, that the sins for which God was most blaming us or punishing us were abortion and rock music. There were a few others, but she was very much against rock music and the syncopated rhythm. Instead of praying for these ascended masters to stop the bombs from falling, in March of 1990, she came into the bunker and she started praying for the bombs to fall. She started praying for the destruction of humanity, of the globe. And this is why I included this group in my book and wanted to explore them, because that's the call for destruction. That's what we're obsessed. This obsession with the book of Revelation. Bring it. Bring the destruction. We want to see it. We want to see everyone else punished, and we want to be the ones left, right? Now, of course, the bombs did not fall, and a lot of people left the group after that, again, for some of the reasons we've discussed about what occurs after a failure of prophecy. And some people who left the group left because they were so shocked and saddened by what they had witnessed, by what they had participated in, right? Um,
All the way through or just up to the end? Like that last thing in the bunker with her praying for the
The
bombs was the tilting
Yeah,
point or
yeah. Because before then, I mean, I know we talked about them amassing an arsenal, but it seems from the people I've interviewed and what I've read that they really were only getting those weapons for self-defense. They were, for the most part, a peaceful group. Now, who knows what would have happened if some threat had occurred, if people in the community had come at them in some way, because that's what we see often when these groups become violent. Is it's this sociologists call it a violence amplification loop. But for the most part, they were peaceful and they were hoping that the world would not end. It's just that toward the end, she took them down a different path.
So, but generally the doomsday groups are some of them right from the get-go are
Yeah.
hoping for the doomsdays. There's this belief that in order to fix it, in order for humanity to ever ascend, we just have to
We have to
tear it
tear
all
it all
down.
down. Yeah, and that was Waco for sure. He wanted it. He was asking for it.
Well, let's refresh me on Waco
All
a
right,
little
let's
bit.
see what I can remember.
Okay. Or anybody else. I just like hearing about cults.
Well, they're fascinating. And, the belief systems among each of these groups is part of what fascinates us the most because it's so out there and wild. How could people believe A, B, or C? But when we can set that aside, everything else about the group is always exactly the same. The foundation is the same, the pattern is the same, because what we're looking at is a cult leader who's seeking power, who's been corrupted by power, and the path of power is always the same. Power is like a parasite, and it leads cult leaders, scam artists, demagogues, whoever gets absolute power. It leads them to behave in particular ways, which seek more power, because again, power is a parasite. So that's why these cults often end in violence, because the ultimate path of power, the ultimate form of control, the most power you can get is control over someone's life and death. That's what happened at Jonestown. That's what happened in Heaven's Gate. That's what happened with Waco.
As we talk about cult leaders and why they fall apart and why they lose their grip, whether it's because things don't come to pass as they predict or something like that, I keep thinking about unreliable narrators,
Hmm.
okay? Like the trick of writing an unreliable narrator, which is that an unreliable narrator can be from the very start working under a fallacious premise, right? But they get the person to swallow the premise, but their logic has to be airtight. It's like when you read Lolita, like, it's terrifying. One of the reasons it's such a powerful book is because you're halfway through the book and you're like, "Oh my god, I'm rooting for the pedophile right
Mhm.
now. Oh, what just happened?" And it's because Humbert's logic, the fallacious, like, right from the that it's somehow okay to sexualize a relationship between an adult and a child. Once they kind of hurry past that, Humbert's logic is so airtight that, like, you just start to buy into the logic because everything else is so logical and you've bought into that. Do you think this is why cults tend to fall apart because there's holes in the logic? Sorry, I'm lobbing you.
No, no,
I'm
no.
This one's coming out of
I mean, the arguments being bulletproof, so to speak. Yes, part of the way they become bulletproof is by suppressing critical thinking among listeners. Um, a listener asks a question and the leader responds in a way that basically shuts down the question, shuts down critical thinking. Um, Typically, that's done by turning it back on the person, like blaming them, you know? And w- undue influence, thought reform, the whole point of it is to diminish critical thinking. And then, of course, we see tactics in cults like they keep you up all night. They don't give you enough food. They change people's names. All of those things diminish critical thinking. And so when you've got a person who's just putty in your hands that way, or like you said, tearing people down so you can build them back up, right? Um, then you can really tell them whatever you want. And so only when people get their critical thinking skills back are they able to poke holes in the argument or see the holes that exist in these arguments. And again, when we were talking about, the deprogramming movement in the 80s and these kids would be trapped in these houses with the windows boarded up, they were hoping for their critical thinking skills to return.
So, how do we lead 30% of our nation back that way? I know that ultimately you're pretty hopeful about this, right?
I am. Yeah, I am.
I mean, so how do we mitigate this cultish fever that continues to how do we know we can't do it arguing with people online. It doesn't work.
No.
You can't present a cogent argument to somebody who, because on the internet, you can just troll people. But what I have noticed is I have actually maybe you agree, maybe you don't with this. I've actually found that I can reason with these people in person.
Mm.
The same person that's gonna shut me down on the internet, if I run into him at the fairgrounds, part of it is just they don't have that buffer, right?
Mhm.
Like, they have to face me, I'm a person, they're a
Mhm,
person, and,
mhm.
like, you can actually have a civil conversation about some of these
At the
things. To me, that's
fairgrounds?
the key is, like, yeah, yeah, well, that's right. I mean, I live in a rural area, right? So I'm using that. I mean, I got a lot of big bellied guys with red hats I'm dealing with.
Yeah.
And if I get into a conversation with them, like in real time, they'll
Yeah.
actually listen and they're a little more thoughtful. Like, I can disarm them. But if I'm just an avatar
Mhm,
on a
mhm.
screen and they're just like, I'm just on this faceless enemy of the libtard or whatever, they're not going to listen to my thing. So how do we help these people regain their, if they ever had any or how do we teach them?
Conversation, yeah, definitely. I mean, exit counselors, which is what deprogrammers call themselves now, talk about the importance of asking questions. Get these people to articulate their beliefs because then sometimes when they hear themselves talking, they'll think, "Well, now wait a second. Is that right? Or where did I get that from?" Um, don't argue. Don't argue. It doesn't work. It leads each side to just dig in their heels. But do share your feelings. Do share your own beliefs, and ask questions and leave open channels of communication. So whether that's talking to strangers at the fairgrounds, or whether that's with a loved one who's kind of gone off the deep end in one direction, don't shut them out. Keep channels of communication open because when people do start to question, then they can turn to you and they know that
Right,
it's
and I
safe.
don't think we're doing that at all. I mean, many of my lefty counterparts are just like, "You voted for this, you're dead to me,
Yeah.
I'm never gonna." I mean, unfortunately, we're gonna just have to turn the other cheek, I mean, if there's gonna be healing, right? I think
Yeah.
that unless you offer a safe space for somebody to say, "Look, I was wrong in my thinking, or I
Mhm.
made some mistakes, or I'm seeing things clearly now." I mean, if you don't offer them that opportunity to make repartations, then you're just going to alienate them further,
Mhm.
right? They're gonna be further aggrieved. See? It's like I said all along with you coastal elites.
Mhm.
You won't listen to me. You don't see the real problem, so.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Keep open the communication and remember that the real enemies are the people exploiting Americans in order to gain power and money without merit. Um, Many of the people being exploited are spouting a certain narrative that I find harmful and I disagree with it. But I also remind myself that to a degree, these people are being victimized by the exploiters in charge. Now, does that mean that, you know, people in January 6th who caused harm shouldn't, uh, you know, meet the law? No, I think they should. I think if you've gone and done actual harm yourself, even if it's as a result of indoctrination, then you're gonna have to pay for that. But a lot of these people are just desperate, and they've believed something that isn't true because someone has gone to great lengths to manipulate them to the degree that they will believe.
Yeah, well, you gotta basically detox them from the
Mhm,
Kool-Aid, so,
mhm.
well, she is Jane Borden. The book is fascinating. It's called Cults Like Us. Jane, thank you so much for being my fresh face and helping
Thanks for
space.
having me, Jonathan. I appreciate it.
Thanks.